How's it going, punks? Today's topic is going to be a little bit out there. So because I have a platform, I'm going to choose to use it for the greater good. Today's topic is going to be about bowls. Bowls are the best way to hold food. Now let's talk about it. First, let's talk about the shape of a bowl. This. I don't know if this visual is helpful or not. I'll probably just edit in like a picture like right here or something like that in case you forgot what a bowl looks like. But basically, this shape allows for holding liquids and solids effectively. Now, let's look at this beta cuck male version called a plate. Plates can't really hold liquids very well, alright? You ever try to pour a glass of milk into a plate? Yeah, it's not very good. It's gonna spill all over. Not to mention, it's not actually unheard of to drink out of a bowl. So bowls, well, they can be used as cups or as plates. Plates, however, cannot be used. You see where I'm going with this? Now, a lot of you are probably still not on board. You're all like, oh, well, there are certain foods that you should eat on a plate as opposed to in a bowl. Now, let's go over some of these common foods that you find on a plate. Now, when you go to a restaurant, let's say, I remember the last time I went to like an Olive Garden or something like that, ordered the spaghetti, and it came on a plate. Granted, the plate had a little bit of depth to it, but it wasn't, significant. It was still a plate nonetheless. Now let's imagine if, unlike a complete troglodyte, you decided you were going to put it in a bowl instead. So that spaghetti is going to pile up. All the sauce and all that stuff is going to be more concentrated towards the center. Because of the shape, things are more inclined to go towards the center of where you're eating, which makes it easier. It's not going to spread out, and you don't have to chase it with your fork as much if you were to eat it in a bowl as opposed to on a plate. Now let's talk about something that conventionally wouldn't make as much sense in a bowl, but we'll put it in a bowl anyway for this hypothetical. Waffles. Let's say you make some Eggo waffles for breakfast or something like that. You put those bad boys on a plate. That syrup's gonna spread out, right? If you put it in a bowl where it does have, a relatively flat bottom anyway, you put it in a bowl, all that syrup is going to just go to that center, right where you want it, so you don't have to chase it around with your fork. It just makes more sense if we were to eat out of bowls instead of out of plates. There are very few foods, if any, that would be a better experience if it had the ability to spread out. And even if there are those foods out there, you also need to consider the convenience of eating that food. It seems like it would be a lot more convenient to eat that food out of a bowl-shaped plateware as opposed to on a plate. So even if you're eating out of a shallow bowl, those sides are going to contain everything, kind of keep it more towards the center, which is kind of your goal. Now, some people would then argue, oh, well, what about if you don't like your food touching? If you're so concerned about your food touching, why wouldn't you just get a separate, smaller bowl for that side? Now, when I brought this up to my folks, they said, oh, well, I wouldn't eat a steak in a bowl. But then it got me thinking, well, why? And to that they responded, oh, well, you'd have to cut at an angle if you were to do that. But that argument didn't really make sense to me because who cuts their food parallel to what they're eating off of? Literally no one. You're cutting at an angle anyway. If anything, that bowl would provide you a better angle to cut at. Now let's move on to silverware. When I was in basic, I quickly found out that using a knife was actually incredibly inefficient when it came to spreading. And then it got me thinking, why do we spread things, spreadable things with a knife and not with a spoon? The second I switched to using a spoon to make PB&J, I was able to make it 10 times as quickly. See, the spoon has this neat little shape that allows you to scoop as opposed to try to get as much on as you can. When you try to get something spreadable onto a knife, it's not going to stay nearly as effectively as if you were to scoop it. Using a spoon would be way better for spreadable things, but we just use a knife anyway. In fact, it's literally called a butter knife, the knife that we usually use to spread things. But knives should really only be used for cutting. Spoons should be used, in my opinion, the majority of the time, because they can, cut okay. They can cut about as effectively as a fork, but they also have the benefit of being able to scoop and spread. Forks, they only really stab. So if I were to rank them, I would say spoon is probably S tier, and then, it begins with the letter S anyway, so it kind of just makes sense, knife and fork, no. They're gonna be lower on the tier list for silverware. Now you're probably thinking, Wolf, where are you going with this? Who cares about bowls? Who cares about silverware? Well, here's why it's important to think about these things. Why is it that the standard conventions are inefficient? Why is it frowned upon or, looked at as abnormal to be using a spoon in a way that is contrary to that standard convention? Why is it that we can't use a bowl for certain foods, but we have to use a plate for others? It just doesn't make sense to me. So the whole point of this is challenging conventions, because these utensils and plateware should make eating, efficient, or that sounds kind of strange when you put it that way, but it shouldn't cause an inconvenience just because of a convention that has been put up. Now, you can still have plenty good manners if you're using a bowl and spoon for basically everything you eat. But my question is, why is it not the standard to use these more practical utensils and forms of plateware? Bowls, in general, just make more sense to eat out of. There are shallow bowls that have plenty of room. You can eat like a big soup out of it, but you could also have waffles, spaghetti, heck, even a steak, even though, I can't really eat steak, but that's beside the point. So the next time you do something that's very mundane, question the convention. Why is it really in place? Is there a more efficient way? Because that is actually how we make progress. We make progress when we question the things that usually we take as a standard. That's gonna do it for this one, punks. Be sure to stick around, subscribe, whatever. We hit 750. That's pretty epic. 750. I don't know what that hand gesture is. I usually do this. Stay frosty. Ta-ta for now, punks.